Hello and welcome to Buddhist Door Global's weekly news highlight. I'm Dr. Justin Whitaker, Senior Correspondent for BDG. This week we highlight the news that nationwide curfews were lifted in Sri Lanka to allow celebrations of Vesak. We'll look at recent BDG coverage of Buddhism in Sri Lanka, but first this news. Sri Lanka's beleaguered government lifted curfews to allow the country's Buddhist majority to observe the festival of Vesak on May 15th, which commemorates the birth, attainment of enlightenment, and Mahaparinirvana of the historical Buddha. The authorities announced a 2-day holiday for Vesak without saying whether the curfew would be reimposed afterward. The authorities issued a stay-at-home order on May 9th after days of deadly clashes that left 9 people dead and more than 225 wounded following attacks by armed government loyalists on peaceful anti-government demonstrators. Sri Lanka is in the midst of the worst economic crisis in the island nation's history, which has been characterized by record inflation, crippling power cuts, and severe shortages of fuel, food staples, and medicines. The Sri Lankan rupee has become the world's worst performing currency, dropping to a historic low in April and even underperforming the Russian ruble. Furthering the crisis, foreign exchange reserves have been depleted by some 70% over the last 2 years, leaving the country unable to import basic necessities such as food or fuel. The recent violence resulted in the resignation of Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa on May 9th, leaving his brother Gotabaya Rajapaksa to rule as president. President Rajapaksa swore in a new prime minister on May 12th and has called on lawmakers to work together to resolve the deepening crisis. Meanwhile, the country's new prime minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe, who has held office on 5 previous occasions, has begun assembling a cabinet tasked with addressing the economic and political instability. According to media reports, Wickremesinghe has already held meetings with diplomats from China, Britain, India, Japan, and the United States to discuss financial aid. Last week, he forecast that shortages would become worse with national foreign reserves needed to import essential goods dropping below $50 million. While many ordinary Sri Lankans already hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic are forced to wait in lines for hours in the hope of securing basic daily necessities, a senior Sri Lankan politician earlier warned of the imminent threat of starvation for the South Asian nation's population of 22 million people, noting that the current turmoil is, quote, just the beginning. Sri Lankans have taken to the streets repeatedly in mass protests, outraged by the economic mismanagement and corruption of successive governments, and in defiance of a curfew order and the state of emergency declared by President Rajapaksa. The people have demanded that Rajapaksa resign and transfer control of their country away from his family, who have ruled Sri Lanka for several decades, to more qualified public servants. Despite allowing Vesak observations to be held, the government canceled state plans for the festival, which had been scheduled at the ancient Kuragala Buddhist complex in the south of Sri Lanka. An official stated that Buddhists were free to conduct their own celebrations, including the mass meditations and Dharma talks traditionally held for the occasion. Buddhism is the state religion of Sri Lanka, which gained independence from British rule in 1948, with 70.2% of the population identifying as Theravada Buddhists, according to census from 2012. Hindus make up about 12.6% of Sri Lankans, while Muslims accounted for 9.7%, Christians 7.4%, and others about 0.5%. As the state religion, Buddhism receives special privileges under the Constitution, although the Constitution also stipulates freedom of religion and the right to equality for all citizens. Earlier this month, BDG published an article looking in depth at the current situation in Sri Lanka. There we tracked recent events and the statements of prominent Buddhist monks, noting that, quote, in lobbying for an interim government, Sinhalese Buddhist leaders are speaking in tune with public sentiments. The Sri Lankan Constitution, while guaranteeing freedom of religion, states, quote, the Republic of Sri Lanka shall give to Buddhism the foremost place, and accordingly, it shall be the duty of the state to protect and foster the Buddha Sasana. If the Rajapaksa political dynasty still takes Article 9 of Chapter 2 of the Constitution seriously, it will listen to what Buddhist leaders are calling for and address this national disaster at any cost, even if it means a conclusion to their long reign over Sri Lankan politics. And 3 years ago, we wrote about the Easter terror bombings at Catholic churches in the country, just 10 years after the formal end to the long-lasting civil war there. At the time, we said that, quote, the Sri Lankan body politic is torn asunder and desperately needs to be brought back together. The country has lurched from one political crisis to the next every year. And clearly, the crisis in this Buddhist country is ongoing, and BDG will bring you continuing news and features as events unfold. And as always, we'll have links to this week's main news and recent coverage of Buddhism in Sri Lanka in the video description. Use the comments below to let us know what you think about the situation in Sri Lanka today. And as always, be sure to check out our website, buddhistdoor.net, for more on this story, as well as other news and features about Buddhism around the world.